I'm Roland Simons, and this is the Property Questions Answered show, the show where I and a special guest answer your questions about property. So today I have a very special guest, Saif Rehan. Now, you may have come across Saif on social media before, but if not, he's an HMO investor, an accountant, a recent dad, and a really nice bloke too. Although early on in his property investing career, he's a deep thinker, a student of the industry, and a master networker, and he brings a lot of value to this chat. In this episode, we answer your questions about planning, favourite property books, mortgage valuations, amongst other things, and also get a bit more insight into who Saif is and what makes him tick. So without further ado, let's get on with the show. Saif, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on, man. How you doing?
I'm good, buddy. It's all good in sunny Oldham.
Sunny Oldham. So is that, that's obviously where you live. Is that like born and bred? Is that where you're from?
Yeah, born and raised here. Lived in a couple of areas of Oldham in my life, which sort of allows me to know where the good streets are, where the bad streets are. But yeah, so that's northeast Greater Manchester for anyone that isn't from around here.
Yeah, cool. So look, for some people that are watching who don't have any context on, who you are and what you do you want to just give a bit of a brief intro as to, those things, work-wise, property-wise, what you're all about?
Absolutely. Full-time accountant working for a company that is also based in Oldham. I have been doing that now for about 5.5 years since I got graduated in accounts. Property only really started actively about just over a year ago, focusing really on the HMO scene. At the minute, it's more cozy for mini beds, minimos really of 4 beds, focusing in that area around the hospital in Oldham.
Okay.
Funnily, none of our tenants are even working at the hospital, but they're all the properties are based out around the hospital, which sort of raised our eyebrows a little bit as to try and understand where they were coming from. But now, fast forward, really pushing levels and to try and do bigger projects, similar levels to what you're doing now, and really just trying to get out of the full-time job at some point and not really rush it too quickly, and just take it easy. But yeah, that's generally me.
Cool. So pre-property, so accountancy. So growing up was like, were you all about maths and numbers, and was that your thing? Yeah.
That was my bag. So that was something that I passed. Like my great granddad was an accountant. My granddad was an accountant. My dad wasn't an accountant, but he was good at maths. And then I naturally picked that up. And then really the numbers side of property is what really got me hooked.
Yeah.
It was where I thought, you know what, this is like, the more and more I started to speak to people, the more and more I realized how the deal analysis element was the most crucial part.
Yeah.
Because you got that wrong, you made the wrong offer. You got that right, you made the right offer.
Yeah.
And as long as you sort of knew there or thereabouts what you were doing after a deal analysis was done correctly, you were there or thereabouts. So that's what hooked me the most. I was like, you know what, I can do this bit.
So I think you're in that fortunate position where, you understand and you can build your own deal analyzer spreadsheet, right? You're not just going to get given a spreadsheet and just like believe that the black box works. Like you understand the numbers and how it all moves around. Right? Yeah.
And that was the important thing for me. Like I'm just the type of guy that unless everything clicks 110% in my head, I just won't do it. I won't do it. It sort of is a problem in some scenarios, and in some instances, it's been a blessing, really.
So does that mean procrastination, or so what I was going to ask you is, so you started about a year ago, like, was it like a catalyst moment where you were just like, right, property, let's go, and you were off to the races?
There was about
build up to that.
There was about a year before then, where I was reading books and watching a couple of podcasts and going to the odd free 2-hour webinar online and that sort of thing. And I constantly kept thinking in the stage that, you know what, I can't do this yet because I'm not 110% there. And I need to ask 2 or 3 more people about how to speak to estate agents, for argument's sake, before I would even go and speak to one.
Okay.
Just to try and think, oh, what if they say this, or what if they say that? What should I say back? Kept having them sort of dramas going in my head. And the catalyst moment for me was I went to a training event, a 2-day training event. I'm not going to mention the name of the person. He's got a bit of a bad rep going at the minute, but went to a 2-day training event. And that was more so to take my missus and
Okay.
get her to understand a little bit more about what I was doing and what I was trying to do.
Yeah, really important. Yeah.
I wasn't really doing anything but what I was intending to do.
Yeah.
And she came out of that knowing what ROIs were and what yields were. And it was really important because suddenly then our conversations after a long day of me sitting in front of my laptop and me coming to the bedroom and she would say, so what deals have you been looking at? What ROIs are they? Suddenly the conversation started to change. And what happened from there is I spent 2 days at that event and I probably only learnt one thing from there. And when I learned that one thing, I said to myself, bloody hell, I'm having conversation. This is not me trying to sound arrogant in any way, but it was just me knowing that I'd probably overkill the research at this stage and overkill the networking at what point. And then at that point, I realized, you know what? I'm either just going to stay busy like this, learning these one little things at each of these events, or I'm actually going to actively do something. So at that point, I promised myself I would never go to another webinar for the next 6 months, never go to another event unless it was networking, never go to another training event, and any emails that I would get would just instantly get deleted.
So this is when you flipped into action mode rather than...
After that is when things actively started to change.
Yeah.
Really started to change, where I started realizing, okay, my persona was a little bit more different. I was a lot more confident when I was speaking to people.
Yeah.
People thought I was a lot more experienced than I actually was. And that's where things really started to change in my perspective. So that was my moment.
Yeah. And that's pretty, I mean, that comes across to me as well. Like, I think I came across you on Instagram, you know, whatever it was, 6 or 9 months ago. Like I started doing it in May last year, I think. So less than a year ago, probably came across you quite early on. That was probably around the same time that you'd started.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. And like you present very well and, you know, you present as somebody who's not, this isn't meant to sound like you're misrepresenting yourself. But you present in a way that you understand stuff more so than your actual experience because of the amount of education that you've done and that you get it right. So, so at what point in that sort of process was it decided that HMO was kind of the strategy that you wanted to do then?
Well, it's a funny one really, because I was all about I was going down the sourcing route, really.
Right.
I thought I wanted to, that was my entry into property. I was going to source for a long list of investors and get a deal accepted and then email the mailing list that I've got of however many investors and hopefully try and sell the deal and get 2-3K. And then I started networking and I met a chap from Oldham who was at a networking event. And at my amazement, I was like, bloody hell, that's another guy from Oldham. What's he doing here in Manchester at a professional networking event? And then we connected afterwards, started to understand that he was a pretty big investor. And then once I started doing them things, we started to speak, and I was then trying to source for him. That was my mentality, that I would source deals for him. Yeah. He's a big investor. I know he wants to grow his portfolio. I know he wants to get into a little bit more of professional investing. And when I was doing my fact finding on him to understand what he actually owned at the minute, I realized that he owned a couple of properties around the hospital.
Okay.
In Oldham. And when I started to dig into them in a little bit more detail, one of them was a 2 up, 2 down. And I was like, okay, let's go and have a look at this. So we went down, had a look. It was his own personal house at that time that he was going to be moving out of in about a month.
Okay.
Went and had a look around. He showed me around the rooms. I was like, you do know what you can make here, you know? And he was like, what? I was like, this is a perfect 4-bed HMO. Mm. But this is my knowledge head speaking at this stage. Yeah. I was like, this is a perfect HMO. And we met probably 2 weeks after. And he came back to me and he said, Saif, I've had a think. I've looked into it. There's the keys. Let's do a HMO.
Okay.
I was like, okay. When do you want to do it? He's like, let's try and get it started within the next 4 weeks. Get some builders around. Let's go and do it. Let's get an architect in first and just just go and do it.
Did
And
you
at the
project
big,
manage that one for him then,
yeah,
or?
yeah, yeah. So that
Yeah,
was a project man. That was my entry into
yeah,
HMOs. Project management. Boy, oh boy, did I learn some experience in that.
yeah. Well, this is why it's so good to talk to people that are like, I'm also quite early on in the game. So, and this is why, people who say, oh, I only want to talk to people who are mega experienced, they're wrong. Because
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
people that are
yeah, yeah.
starting out and are in the first few years, they're the ones that are learning everything, who are making mistakes right now, who have got the challenges. So, like, what was the biggest challenge, or what's been the biggest challenge to date that you've had, or the biggest sort of
I guess it's the
the biggest
common
problem
one
you've had to solve, I suppose?
is thinking that my builder knew exactly how I wanted it to look.
Right. Okay.
Was my biggest problem.
Yeah.
I soon realized that I had to talk to him as if I was speaking to a 5-year-old, and over explain something and really get it to that level of detail. Soon realized that I had to have baby sort of reports and notes for him, and give him a note after every single meeting that we made every single week to say this is what is outstanding.
Yeah.
For us to really get that progress. But I'm so, like, the first one wasn't a good experience in general. The only thing that we didn't have a good experience on was we were just massively over.
Yeah.
From a money perspective, it was all good. We were probably like 2 or 3 grand over budget overall, which is no biggie.
No.
So that side of things is fine. But the time element is where we really got killed. We were probably like 6 or 7 weeks over.
Yeah. Okay.
How we wanted. And that was just, it was for a number of reasons, really. And that sort of, like, at them sort of decisions, you try and think, and I'm sure you probably thought the same, is that what could I have done differently to have fixed that scenario? Was there anything that I could have said differently, could have explained differently, anything that I could have done? And for me, it was more so trying to give them, like, literally give them everything written on a plate. This is what I need you to do. This is where I need the plug socket going, and at this height, from 100 centimeters from that wall to here, sort of stage. And
yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, it's about, you've got to know, I don't know whether you've worked with that builder again or not, and you might decide not to, but you can work with someone like that, but you need to know that that's how they are, and that, what level of detail they need, because their workmanship might be great, but they've just got no intuitive or practical decision-making skill. So, but then again, you can come across a builder who actually, if you just say, okay, I want 4 plugs in this room, they will actually think about, okay, well, the bed's going there, so we'll have one there, let's have one by the table. Like, you don't need to over-explain to them. So some people just do need a bit of extra on that side of thing, but they may still be worth working with. But it's all about, assessing what they need and giving them what they need so they can do their job. Otherwise, if you get that breakdown in communication, it can get quite messy.
100%. And after that, really, it was onwards and upwards from there. And I soon realized that I had to have some really awkward I had to probably have more awkward conversations that I probably wanted. And I've not really been one that is confident in them scenarios. So a lot of confidence was built in me. A lot of, like, it's allowed me to now preempt scenarios before they even happen. So if I see a builder doing something, or a builder giving a specific excuse, you can sort of preempt and think, right, if I don't address this now, this is what could happen 2-3 weeks down the line. So those were my biggest challenges, and getting around that. What about yourself? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when for me, the challenges have changed a bit, but when you're first starting off, it is really all about that refurb. Like, it sounds silly now because, it's not something I worry myself about, but for the first one, it was honestly like, will this HMO get a license? It was just like, does it comply? Is everything being done according to the fire regulations? Which, like, I had builders who had done HMOs before, like, they knew what they were doing, they knew what a fire door was, they knew what, the fire boarding, and they knew about all the, the fire alarm system. So it was misplaced concern, but it was still probably my biggest concern through that first project. Now I've done a few of them, it's not an issue for me. Like, I know that, it's, and also I think it's not the issue that a lot of people make it out to be. Like, there is this kind of, not for everybody, but there is a bit of a kind of a dogma out there, which is like, you don't go straight to HMOs. Like, do a flat, do a house, then build up to HMO, and it kind of gets overblown, like how complicated it is. I think like it's just a house at the end of the day with a bit of extra fire regulation, right?
Absolutely.
The actual complicated thing in HMO is the management of it going forward, not the refurb part of it, right? So yeah, I think that's kind of like how I've seen the challenge, and then now it's more about, you know, sourcing and financing, and having you can have a week where like your right move alerts are popping off, but no one wants to lend you money, and then the next week it's the opposite, and you know, getting those two things lined up on the same day. So it definitely like changes over time, and I'm sure it will continue to change as like we both go forward. Before we jump on to some questions that people have sent in, I just wanted to touch on social media with you. So you've been pretty active on Instagram. Is that the main platform that you use, or do you do other things?
Yeah, generally. No, everything revolves around Instagram for me. So the three main ones that I generally tend to use is LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram.
Okay.
LinkedIn is something that I'm trying to push into a little bit more and more every day. But at the minute, it's purely been around Instagram. I think Instagram has introduced me to a community unlike any of the other platforms. How friendly people are on there. You can, you know, as you build a bit of experience, you soon realize that there's a couple of people that, you know, you will constantly look out for and constantly see how things are going. And it sort of comes to, like, I don't know how you feel, but there's sometimes that you see what's popular and the snazzy pictures that people put up, you know, how great your places look sometimes, but it puts a bit of pressure on me to try and make sure that I'm at the top of my game in terms of thinking about these design decisions and wanting to get to the stage where I can put some nice photos up on my feed.
Big time.
I mean, anything.
Yeah, completely. I mean, like my first one, it's still like, it had a pretty cool kitchen. It was nice, but the rooms were quite plain. They were quite plain. And it was before I got onto social media, and then I go on there and I'm looking at, like, you know, May Green Investments and B Space and people like that, and I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, why didn't I use any color in the rooms? Like, but again, I look back at it as, you know, for your first project, you're just really focusing on like the nuts and bolts of it, getting it done, and you don't necessarily have the headspace for, okay, so like, you know, what colors are we going to use, half height walls, all this kind of stuff, right? It's just, so in a way, the kind of the finishing touches, you know, all of a sudden, like, you've been so focused on the more like kind of, you know, structural stuff of the project, and then all of a sudden at the end your builder's like, okay, what color are we painting this wall, and you're like, have to make a quick decision. Now I'm much planning that sort of stuff much more early in the project, because, and probably before it's even started, like once we're, you know, during conveyancing, I'm already kind of like figuring out what it's going to look like, because that's the bit that I enjoy the most. So that's the bit that I'm excited to get on with.
Absolutely. And it's probably, for me, it's been more so, I think from a design perspective, I've always had it in my mind as to how I want things to look and go throughout. I constantly change my mind throughout on certain things, but a lot of it has been based around making sure, one, as long as the furniture fits in the measurements that I've got in my rooms and how it is, I'll worry about the colors and what have you later. I've sort of not really fluked it, but just thought, you know what, I haven't got the time to make those decisions at this stage. Whereas we've got one going through legals now, where I think I'll actually spend a little bit more time creating that mood board, creating what the themes are generally going to be like, probably spend a little bit of time with the kitchen supplier beforehand to design what the kitchens will look like, and really think about it, so that when it comes to the crucial elements, a lot of the decisions have already been made and you don't need to stress at that point. Which I think
by doing it like that, you get a more cohesive look, because it's a bit more planned, right? So if you've got something that a theme or some sort, not a theme, that sounds really tacky, but like a theme bar or something. But like, if you've got some sort of like kind of features that you want to kind of like be continuous through the house or whatever, if you do that sort of planning work up front, that's more likely to kind of come to fruition, rather than if it's all a bit kind of random at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been quite enjoyable, to be honest. It's nice to see what a good bit of furniture and a good bit of dressing can actually do to some rooms. So yeah, that end stage is stressful as hell, but boy oh boy is it enjoyable once you see the finished product, and in its actual final stage.
Yeah, definitely. Well, look, we could bang on for hours, right? But we have got some cool questions sent in by some audience. So Saif and I, if you're just watching this on YouTube, Saif and I both put up stuff on Instagram saying that we were doing this recording, and some people have kindly sent in some questions that they wanted us to give our perspectives on. So we won't necessarily agree on the answers on these, but the idea is that we can have a bit of a chat, have a bit of a debate, and hopefully that'll be useful to people. So the first one is from Kaza GM Properties, and I'm pretty sure those guys do HMOs as well. And they've asked, what are the due diligence checks that you carry out before offering on a property? And how do you execute those due diligence checks? So pre-offer sort of viewing, then what sort of due diligence checks? Do you want to jump on that one first?
Yeah, so a lot of the one with me, it's a little bit easier because I generally know the areas that I'm invested in for God knows how many years. I probably walked the streets as a kid. Know where the neighborhood gangsters are probably stood and what have you, where crime rates are and blah, blah, blah. So that side of things is quite easy. So I've got a lot of prejudgments already in my head before I've gone to a viewing to know what the area is like.
Yeah.
In terms of actual due diligence, a lot of it comes down to, like, I do a lot of tweaking on spare room to see what is exactly in them areas from a HM perspective. So like you could be really, really basic and just look at the number of rooms that are available and then look at how many people are actually wanting them. But then you can use filters down the side and really get a bit more specific and see what the demand is, because them numbers can completely sway the other way.
Yeah.
So for argument's sake, I was looking at a deal, and when I did my really basic analysis, it was coming out pretty well, where like 80 people were looking and 10 rooms were available. And I was like, oh, bloody hell, fantastic. But when I looked at it and put the number of people that were willing to pay the rent that I were wanting to pitch at, that number comes down to 10, 15.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you've only got 3 or 4 rooms that you're competing with.
Yeah.
So it's sort of hedging your bets really on thinking that, is that enough of a demand there to fill, let's say, an 8-bedroom property or anything like that. So that side of things. So one of the things I do a lot is dummy ads.
Yeah.
I do that quite religiously, just to make sure that, you know, if there is something, but I'll only do that on a property. I probably will do that after offering. Probably wouldn't do that before offering.
Yeah.
Main reason
you've got time to, right? Like,
no, I don't think
depends
so.
what the market's like, but generally speaking, I think, you know, you want to offer pretty quickly after your viewing time. So,
absolutely.
And the agents appreciate that as well, and it gives you credibility and makes you look like a player rather than.
And to be honest, I think as long as the due diligence is done on the area at the start before you're even looking at the properties, I think a lot of mine, like I pretty much go to these properties knowing what my offer will be there or thereabouts.
Yeah. And
just making sure that, you know, a wall's not falling down from the side of the property or anything like that. And you just really sense checking. But the fact that you're doing major refurbs anyway and going back to brick, like a bit of damp doesn't really bother you. Because you're going to rip the plaster off anyway. So there's no real point. But it's a toughie. It's a toughie, really.
I think I mean, I think you're right. Like on viewings, you know, pretty focused on, you know, structural stuff, you know, drains, windows are a big one. So, you know, if you're going to have to replace the windows or not, I mean, you know, I don't know about you, I'm always going to be replacing the boiler anyway. You know, the kitchen's coming out anyway. But yeah, windows is one where we won't always replace them.
How do you estimate your refurb?
I mean, to be honest, it gets to the point where it's kind of like you've got precedents that you've done yourself, and you kind of you know, they're all fairly similar. So it's kind of like, okay, this is the kind of the benchmark, and then these things might be a bit cheaper on this one, but these ones might be a bit more expensive, and it's kind of almost like a bridge from the last one to the new one, like with the plus and minuses. What else am I looking at? So I'm generally doing a loft conversion. So I'm going to get in the loft and measure the ridge height, and looking at any planning history as well. Actually, if there's ever been any planning applications put in on the property address, it's probably a good one. But yeah, I sort of agree with you, really. I mean, I don't want to waste my time going to a viewing unless I'm pretty likely to want to. I wouldn't go to a viewing on a house that I don't want to own ultimately.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, yeah.
So
Absolutely.
if
You
you've
know the
already,
area works
you already
already.
know it's a good area, it's the right sort of property. Oh, I'm definitely going. I do all my own. I recreate the floor plan. So it annoys the estate agents like anything, right? Because you get in there with your laser measure and you take every single measurement again. Now, if after half of the house they've actually got it pretty accurate, then I'll probably leave it. But
Yeah.
and some of them are actually quite good, but most of them aren't. So yeah, definitely redo the floor plan, particularly if you're reconfiguring it and you're thinking about what you're going to be doing to this property. You need to have accurate measurements, right?
Absolutely.
So that's one. But yeah, basically, before I go there, I already have an idea that I'd like to own it. So it's really then like going in and checking the condition of it, making sure there's no like deal breakers, checking it's actually as big as it says it is. And also probably checking out the neighbouring properties a little bit. So, it might be a generally a decent-ish street, but if maybe the next door neighbor or is if their house looks like an absolute slum and it's got like a burnt out car on the driveway, that is not going to be easy to do viewings on. It doesn't matter how nice your HMO is inside.
Yeah.
If there's like a Rottweiler and a burnt out car in the front garden of the next house, no one's going to want to live there. So that's the sort of stuff which you can't always tell from the Rightmove picture, which has just got the house. You won't necessarily see it from Google Street View because it might be a recent development. So all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think that's I think this is basically like
good thing that I generally do if I'm really really serious and I know that my offer is there or thereabouts.
Yeah.
Sometimes what I'll do is I'll drive around that area at night as well and just see what it's like. Whether it's because some streets could be completely different post 10 o'clock.
That's true.
So that's something that I don't do it a lot, but if I know I'm probably $2 or $3 grand away and we're negotiating now with the estate agent, I'll probably just go there and just get a bit of peace of mind and think, you know what, this
good idea, because actually I haven't done that myself, but it's a good idea because a lot of HMO viewings are in the evening after work.
Yeah.
Young professionals, they don't take time off to a viewing. They do it at
Absolutely.
6, 7, 8 p.m. and half the year that's dark. So you want to know what it feels like to walk from the bus stop to the house or from the station to the house, and what experience they're going to have when they come for that viewing. Because if it's not well lit, or if it doesn't feel good, then that's they're going to have the same experience, right? So that's a good one. All right, so what else did we get? Okay, I can't actually remember who sent this one in. I couldn't find it in my Instagram, but it was a good question, so I thought I'd bring it up. What property investing books do you recommend? And I think this is for, if you're sort of getting going, are there any books that you recommend? So I'll sort of start this one off by saying that I haven't actually read many property specific sort of books that I'm a massive fan of. And I think that quite a few of them they're a bit, it depends who the author is, but if it's a company, if it's an author who's also got a training business, the chances are that they're not giving it all away in the book. So there are some books which you can pick up some nuggets from these, but you won't necessarily get the whole picture. So I'm not necessarily, I mean, look, Rich Dad Poor Dad I think is kind of worth reading from a sort of to get in sort of the headspace of it all. Yeah, it's a decent one. Probably the ones that I quite enjoyed is by Rob Dix, so one of the two Robs on the property.
I've not read them.
Yeah, so he's got quite a few books, and obviously they're all on Amazon, and he's not an HMO guy at all, much more of a single let investor, but I think he writes well, and I think that his books, I don't know whether it's worth reading all of them because there's quite a lot of them, but see which one's got the best reviews on Amazon. See which one's recent as well, because obviously this is another issue where regulations change all the time, and you need to be reading something which is up to date, but and also reflects the current property market. But yeah, he's an author that I think is quite worth having a look at. Are there any books? Are you a reader, or are you more of an audiobook or podcast?
No, to be honest, I'm neither. to be honest. Books isn't something that I generally is a way that I consume knowledge.
Yeah.
Most of it for me is like, I do a lot on YouTube.
Yeah.
Love watching my interviews. Love listening to podcasts. Audiobook. I'll probably only listen to an audiobook if it's done by an author with a cool voice. If it's an old man that's narrating the book, I'll know I'll switch off. I'll be driving, and I've had it plenty of times where I'm driving and 10 minutes have gone and I can't remember what I've just listened to the last 10 minutes. I'm just dazed. And then I'll have to rewind back and listen to it again. So yeah, sometimes it annoys me more than anything else. But one of the books that I did read when I first started was Property Magic by Simon Zutshi. Now I know he's obviously got a bit of a lean towards his networking side and his training side. But as a general, I thought it was really good to pick on what you can do with other people's money and understanding how property values increase and that side.
It's a very good overview of lots and lots of different strategies, right? So it is, you know, in terms of a short book, which kind of gets you a little bit up the curve on lots of different things. I think it's worth reading, and it is a short book, so you know it's not a huge investment of your time to go and get that one.
That one's really good. I can't think of anything else. There were a few like small ones that suddenly, while I was in the momentum when I was starting off, that Amazon just kept recommending by really small authors, and I'd just buy them and and then I probably got to like 3 or 4 in, and then realized, wait a second, all of these are just saying the same thing over and over again. And then just sort of packed it in a bit then. But Simon Zutshi's book was massive for me at that time when I was reading. When I thought that you could buy a house and put it on rent. Didn't know what HMO was or anything like that at that point.
So for you, and probably for me as well, podcasts are more your sort of thing, right? Like that.
Yeah, of course.
And
you can connect with the person. You understand, like you hear their voice, you know what they're talking. More often than not, you would probably like be bought into listening to that podcast, not necessarily just to listen, but maybe there's something that you preempt that, you know what, I'm going to learn a lot from this guy. Or at some point, like Inside Property Investing, for example, they put some really, really good ones out there. But I generally tend to focus on ones that I know that are from HMO investors, and then I'll be bought in a little bit more at that point.
Yeah, that's a fair point. So I think the answer on that one is that neither of us are massively recommending a particular property book, but we do recommend the Inside Property Investing podcast. So now we had a question from Mary and Andrew. You know those guys, right? Elite Investor Group. Do you buy properties subject to planning or apply for planning post-purchase? So do you have to apply for planning where you are? Are you Article 4 or are you doing...
No, so we're not Article 4, but you know, we're looking at the one that we're looking at now is going to be sui generis, so we probably will. I've never gone through the planning route. So that'll be interesting. But I actually put my first offer in last week on a property where I offered a vendor a little bit more money, but said that it would have to be contingent to planning being accepted. Never really done it. I guess for me, I've always been pretty sure that there were multiple exits, that if planning wasn't to come in, there was going to be another route, whether it would be to, you know, make offices in a commercial building or what have you. And most of the time, a lot of the 2 properties that I've done, I've just been planning permitted development as opposed to getting any form of planning permission.
So I mean, for me, because I've done 8-bedroom HMOs so far, like all of my properties are 8 beds so far. So I do have to get planning permission for it. But the way that I do it is I do the, and you take a bit of risk when you do this approach, but so I do the refurb, and effectively the 2 extra rooms are in the loft. And so I do that all as part of the refurb. And then afterwards, when it's completed, that's when I put in the planning application. And that planning application isn't to change a regular house into a larger HMO. It's to change a C4 HMO into a sui generis HMO. Because at that point,
what would you do if the planning officer came in mid refurb and says, "What are you doing here, mate?"
Well, I mean, there's nothing they can do to stop you doing a like, you know, building 8 bedrooms, you know, they could say, well, look, you might not be able to rent all of these out. Right? But there's nothing to say, there's nothing to stop you doing the loft conversion, putting in the extra bedrooms. They might, you know, the risk is that they would remain empty if you didn't get change of use, right?
Okay.
So, but the reason that I do it like that is because if I was to go in, and it's, you know, this is where you've got to check your local plan. So if I was to go in with, this is a 1,200 square foot 3-bed house, I want to convert this into a sui generis HMO, and this is in an area which is not Article 4, so I wouldn't have to get planning for a regular HMO, but for a larger one, I would. That would get rejected because those kind of family houses in a lot of areas anyway are protected from conversion. So like you won't be able to convert them into flats, like you won't be able to convert it to a large HMO, lots of things, right? So, although those are probably the main things. So that's kind of a non-starter. But what they can't obviously do unpermitted development is you can change it into a HMO for 6 people. So yeah, by doing all the work up front, then you go in and say, the planning application basically says that there are already 6 people living here. We just want to let 2 more people live here. Like, what's the harm? Like, you know, maybe you'll get 1 more car, you know, but really, what difference is it going to make? So that's, and I mean, you know, touch wood, that's been a successful strategy so far, is to kind of bring it.
Have you never been rejected through that route then?
Never been. So no, 4 from 4 so far.
Nice.
But two have gone to committee. Well, it's actually the subcommittee, so they don't take like small shit like this to the big committee. But yeah, 2 have gone to subcommittee because they've got a certain amount of neighbourhood objections. It's very random actually. Like, this is all in quite a small area as well, but a couple of them didn't get any attention from the neighbours, like 1 or 2 comments submitted on the website. 2 others gained quite a bit of attention from residents who were concerned about an HMO, which I understand, because, you know, some HMOs are quite disruptive.
Absolutely.
Not ours, but, you know, some people's are. And so, and then, you know, you get a bit of a neighbourhood campaign going where someone's, you know, telling people like,
rallying the troops,
just go on and sign this thing, will you? And so that sort of thing can happen. But, you know, at the end of the day, even if it goes to committee, like, they've still got to follow planning policy, and there's no particularly good reason to say that 2 extra people can't live here. So yeah, so to answer Mary and Andrew's question, that is the way that I do it. But in an Article 4 area, I don't think I would take that approach. Can
I ask a little sub-question to that?
Yeah.
So I've got a project now that we're looking at, which is pretty exciting. I've not really shared much on my social media about it, so it's probably the first public mention of it.
It's exclusive. It's a YouTube exclusive.
Yeah. It's a 2-bed that we're hoping to convert into at least a 9-bed.
Right.
Now, that'll be juicy. So it's side extensions, double-story extension on the side, and then a dormer conversion on the top across the whole property. We've got 3 bedrooms on the ground floor with a communal living room, 4 bedrooms on the first floor. This is in my plan in my head at the minute.
Yeah.
4 bedrooms on the first floor, which takes us to 7, and then we've got 2 up top, which is 9.
Yeah.
Now, I was trying to think. Now, that strategy that you've mentioned there about doing the works and getting it, because I saw that there's some permitted development changes now where I don't think you need planning permission for a double-story extension.
Yeah, exactly.
So, because we've got
you
7...
can take advantage of all of the households are permitted development rights when you're doing your extensions, because it only becomes an HMO once the 3+ people are living there, right? So you can use all of your regular house PDs to do your massive extensions and build the whole thing out, and then lo and behold, you move 3, 4, 5, 6 people in, and now it's an HMO. So yeah, that route can work. Now the problem is when you've got a big, you know, it needs to still stack as a 6-bed. Like, what if you got stuck at 6 and you didn't get planning? And it needs to be something that you still be happy with.
Very true.
At that level, right? And that's the way that I look at it. So, you know, I've got, you know, if I do get stuck, if I don't get planning, if I appeal it and I still don't get it, you know, probably you'd end up with 7. But let's say you did get stuck with 6, it still needs to be something that you're not happy with, but it's acceptable. It doesn't like blow up your business and your investors and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of your downside case that's got to
And
be.
have you had any, like, have you used bridging at all at any of these deals, and have had, or have you generally used investor finance?
So, well, probably both actually. I mean, some have been purely investor finance. I say purely. There's always a bit of my own money in it, but investor finance on the on the debt side, either all investors or a mixture of a bridge loan plus investors. Basically, investors kind of giving the refurb tranche, basically. So what I haven't done yet is it's basically like a development finance deal, where you get 70% of the purchase plus the refurb money. And then the thing that's kind of put me off those is the refurb, like drawing down the refurb money in tranches, basically, like having someone come out to check the work and then paying you in arrears for what you've already spent. And I think I'm probably kind of like exaggerating it in my mind. And I know lots of people that have done it and it hasn't actually been much of a problem, but you have still got that concern every time they've got to come out that they're going to say, not sure we're going to release that tranche this time. So, which would be quite problematic. So, and obviously there is a bit of a higher bar there to getting the funds, in terms of like they're going to send a surveyor out at the beginning to say what they think the end value is going to be. And when your end values are predicated on your rents, they can find it hard. They can it depends how you're sort of positioned in your market. If you're sort of very top end of the market and potentially at a premium to the market, then a surveyor might come out and say, well, look, I've looked on Spare Room. These are the sort of rents that rooms go for in this area. So we think your GDV is not right. Whereas it is, because you've done one before and you know what they get valued up at. So there's very few reasons why I haven't done one of those types of deals yet. But yeah, I prefer to work with investors and, potentially just a regular purchase bridge loan if there isn't enough investor finance around at that point.
Understood. Yeah. Decent. I had a really good question as well that came in on my Instagram from a chap called Harvey Gill 1 on Instagram. And his question was all about commercial valuations. And he asked, is there a specific commercial multiple that you would use when you are analyzing some of your HMOs?
Yeah. So I think there's a sort of like rule of thumb that people talk about of kind of between 8 and 12 times rent is sort of being the range, and it varies depending on the area. I mean, in reality, I've had a number of these commercial valuation reports come back now from surveyors, and I haven't seen one yet where it actually talks about a multiple. Like what they talk about is a yield, which is kind of the same thing, right? It's just multiplication instead of division. But so yeah, I mean, look, you do need to. It is very area dependent what that yield's going to be. So I think that like this is where, again, sort of networking and either in person or on social media with other people who are in the area that you're focusing on or you think you want to focus on is really a good idea, because the difference between getting an 8% yield and a 12% yield is, well, it's 50%. So it's going to make a shitload of difference, right? But
the higher in my area probably leans more towards the 12.5% is where I do my deal analysis on, especially for this big one. But yeah, I imagine in some areas, probably down south, it's a lot more generous than how it probably is up here.
Yeah, and then the other thing is that they do tend to do. It depends how there's two kind of ways of doing the commercial val that I've seen. One is that they're going to compare your property to other HMOs. So they will look at some HMO comparables that have been sold. They'll take the purchase price and the rent roll at the time, and they'll calculate a yield, and they'll generate some yield comparables, and then they'll apply that average yield or whatever, or that range of yields to your rent roll. And then you've also got but sometimes they can't find enough HMO comparables, because actually, although if you're on Instagram and you're in our little property community, it feels like everyone's doing HMOs. They're actually not that common. Like not every house is an HMO. So, and surveyors want something that's been sold recently. They want something that's been sold within a certain radius and all that kind of stuff. So what actually seems to happen more often, at least in my area, is that they compare it to a block of flats. And then this
Oh,
is where what you often hear about with commercial valuations is that they take some sort of discount or haircut to your rent. So
right.
they'll look at, say, a block, 3 or 4 small blocks of flats, not a high rise, obviously, but like, a big old house that at some point got converted into 5, 6, 7 units. And those things get sold at auction, reasonably often. There's a few from time to time.
Yeah.
And so, again, they'll look at the rent roll from those, and they'll look at the purchase price, and they'll calculate a yield, but then they're not going to apply that yield straight away to your rents, because as an HMO owner, you've got to pay the bills. You've got to, you've probably got higher management costs than with the multi-unit freehold. You've probably got slightly higher maintenance, all that kind of stuff. And there's just generally, like, people like to kind of kick HMOs down a bit. So they're going to then take some sort of haircut to your rent before they apply that yield. And like in my area, it's 15% probably haircut to the rent, and then the yield could be somewhere between 7.5% and 8.5% to that adjusted number.
Nice.
So it's in that kind of range. But the reason I bring up the haircut is because the haircut will be dependent on, like, because they're trying to net off what those costs are that are non-comparable with the flats. And so it's not really a percent, in an area where the rents are a bit lower, but the cost of electricity and gas and all that kind of stuff is the same, that haircut can get bigger. So it can be like 20-25% taken off the rents before they apply the yield to it. So I think it's really like the best thing that you can do to get a handle around that and don't, talk to your broker. You may get lucky, but I think most people find that doesn't necessarily work very well. The best thing to do is to find people that are like doing it right now in that area who are prepared to kind of like.
And I guess I think the one thing that we probably all feel suckered to when we're doing it at the start is really fudging the numbers and fudging that multiple to make the deal work.
Yeah.
And just thinking, it can come from a number of factors of being frustrated or not getting deals and sourcing being quite difficult at that period of time, and you thinking, go on then, I think I can actually get that 9 multiple instead of 8, but that 9 multiple is another 50 grand on your valuation. So I guess it's just making sure that you're not making them mistakes as well.
It's the most tempting place in your analyzer to take a bit of a risk and push things a little bit to make it stack. But the reality is, it's the bit that you can least control. Like if you want to tweak your rents a little bit and push it, you might be able to get away with it. Like if you're prepared to take a bit longer filling the house, if you're prepared to like really like absolutely hit it on spare room and just message every single person, like you can get a bit more for your rooms, right? Particularly with a fresh brand new house. And if you're a good salesman, like you can push the rents, but you've got no control over the end value. None. Pretty much. Right? You can do your you can do your pack, and you can meet the surveyor and all that kind of good standard stuff, but you can't really control that. So I think it's tempting to do it, but in reality, it's probably the most stupid place that you can try and like kid it, because it's not you're gonna collide with reality on that one. Is there anything else that we had on the? No, those were the 4 questions that we decided to answer. So like I think we should probably leave it there for round 1, Saif.
Really, no, I enjoyed that.
An absolute pleasure connecting properly. Like I said, we've been sort of exchanging messages on Instagram and stuff, and commenting on each other's posts, and probably supporting each other a bit. So it's been really fun to actually connect.
I guess that's the power of social media, and I think that was the community that I was referring to. Like like before I came on this call, I probably already thought, you know what, I actually know Roland already quite well because we have spoke. And it's pretty bizarre, because you suddenly in your normal life or anything like that, you probably be quite reserved, making new friends or anything like that. But when it comes to property, the more friends, the merrier, really.
Yeah, it's a very open community. The reality is that you're in Oldham and I'm in South London, so we're not competing. Like there's no reason not to share information, right? So yeah, I think generally speaking, people are pretty, eager to help where they can. And I suppose the other final thing, like the final tip before we sign off is, one of the reasons that you and I probably feel like we know each other a bit is because we both do the old face to camera. And you probably did it before I did, to be fair. And it was one of those things which a lot of people, certainly for me, it was quite weird. Like I was already posting and I was doing stories where I was filming outwards at my houses, but I wasn't putting my face on there. And
Absolutely.
I had an experience where I went to a networking event and people didn't know who I was. That sounds like really like big-headed, but the point, but basically it turned out they did know, like in like 5-10 minutes into a conversation, they'd be like, "Oh, Bricks and Daughters."
Yeah, is that you? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The second name on Instagram. But they hadn't, but they didn't know who I was. So they never put my face on there. So definitely, we've always said, it's a good idea to get on social if you aren't already. And if you're a watcher, then become a contributor as well, because it's you get a lot more out of it if you put something into it. But once you've kind of got over that first hurdle of contributing, I think putting your face up out there, because your face is like the most unique part of your personal brand.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. It does you wonders. It does you wonders. And I find that you get a lot more engagement when your own face is on there as opposed to when it's not.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, look, I'm up in my loft and I am absolutely roasting it here. My face is red. I need to get out. So listen, man, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm so grateful for you coming on the first episode of the show. And we're going to have to do it again sometime. Have a good evening.
See you later, mate.
Bye. So there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Massive thanks to Saif for his time. And if you want to get in touch with him, I've tagged up his social links in the show notes, so go give him a follow. I've got some more cracking guests lined up for season 1, so don't forget to subscribe to be notified when the next show drops, and I'll see you on the next episode.